All right, it looks like it's 1 o'clock. Welcome to our first afternoon meeting, Down to Earth with Geotech. Yeah, that clock is wrong, so... Yep. Yeah. So let's get started. Turn it over to Matt.
Well, I didn't even know it was time to talk. Okay. Start that. So, this is my presentation. Put this together for all of you. I worked on this personally, kind of tried to curate this a little bit. I made some assumptions in my preparation, one of those being the audience. So I'd kind of just like to start with a show of hands, just kind of poll people who are here. So anybody a roadway designer, roadway folks? Okay. About project management? Okay. And then I know where the Geotech folks are. So, hey, thanks. I'm probably going to walk around and move a little bit until well, who else? Who else? Structures, photogrammetry, estimating. Anybody else? Is that everybody? You lost? Okay. That's a standard design almost. Okay. So anyways, moving on. I'm Matt. I had a picture up here of myself, and I hate the way I talk, and I hate the way I look. So that's where I'm from, in North Carolina. I grew up outside of Waxhaw. I've been licking dirt and feeling dirt in North Carolina all my life. I went to NC State. Went for undergrad, actually attended. I moved back up to Raleigh with the intent of going to NC State to work on a master's, and instead I worked on the side of a drill rig and did a degree remotely. So I'm a PE in North Carolina and a couple other states. Came out of school. I worked for a private engineering firm. I'm still very new to DOT, so don't always know where to stand. Never more true than this week. And then I kind of went into construction inspections, material testing, both in the lab and in the field. Got to see a lot of stuff get built, a lot of vertical construction, and then I kind of moved over to transportation projects with the light rail down in Charlotte. I worked on the southern corridor doing materials testing and inspections, and then when our firm got the Geotech on the northeast corridor, the design, I was very early in my career, but I was basically handed 16 miles of alignment up along Tryon and just told to go. And sort of figured it out from there. I knew that I wanted to get over to the Geotech side, and once I finished up the investigation for that, I got thrown more into the design part of it. That was what kind of made me realize that, yeah, I probably wasn't the best student in undergrad, probably needed to figure out some structured way to learn design, I guess. And so that was what made me go back and get a master's, and then that worked out because as I was working through design, I was actually hitting some of this stuff in class, and so I was seeing some real-world applications, and got a little bit of pavement design and management experience. And then most recently, back in April, John Polipchuk retired, and I was dumb enough to apply for this job, and then I got picked, and this had a whole lot of different meaning before Helene came through, and so this was being put together, and I rehearsed this. I've gone through this. Not every slide I'm going to talk on for 3 minutes, but if this stops short, or if I stop it short, apologies. So we'll just get rolling. So further introductions. I just kind of wanted to introduce the unit. Let you all know. So this is pre-construction focused. And so the unit on the pre-construction side is sort of divided between investigations, the geologist, and design and the engineers. And so I don't need to read the map to you, but what I do want to point out is, all right, first of all, if I put this map together, I would not have put these in alphabetical order when the colors go in a different order. But I'm just working with what I got here. So what I want to point out is we got an Asheville office. They're all okay, for those asking. We've been in touch with everybody. We got an office down in Harrisburg outside Charlotte. That's where design is, and Eric is my assistant in the West. And then we have a group at Century Center that's called Contracts on this map, but we cover 7 and 8 currently. And then we have a Garner office in Wake County that they kind of divide up the coastal plain with our Greenville office. So we've got investigation crews in Greenville and Asheville, which I'll touch on shortly. But just kind of wanted to throw in some org slides. My contact info is at the end of this. I don't know if all the slide decks go out to everybody. I put links in here just to make some of this easier. But feel free to reach out to me if any of you want the slides, and I'll pass that on too. But kind of just wanted to introduce the East. So a few of these guys are here from the design group. Y'all want to raise your hands? Jin Young, Verda, Thane didn't make it, I think. And then the other two are investigations groups, and then these guys are our internal drill crew in Greenville. And then centrally, like I said, we cover 7 and 8, design and investigations. That's also where we handle contracts for the field offices. So everybody that's contracted through our contract works with that group. They handle the money and contracting aspects. And then the statewide pavement group is there, or geopavement group. For those of you that aren't familiar with how that's set up, not confusing at all, but we basically do pavement up to the bottom of the pavement, the grade 2 line. We tell them what to put it on. We tell them how to prep, subgrade. We give them all those recommendations and quantities. We're going to kind of touch on that in a little bit. And then support services is over here. They're at Century Center as well. They currently report directly to me, but their function is to maintain policy, standards, that sort of thing for the rest of the unit. So in the West, like I said, Eric sits in Harrisburg. He's my assistant down there. And then you've got Shane, who's our design engineer in the West. He's actually up in Asheville, and then Shipping and Michael are in Harrisburg. That vacancy just got moved back to there. I'll probably be pushing them to fill that. Kevin and Clay run investigations. Kevin is in Harrisburg, and then Clay is up in Asheville. So just kind of want to let y'all know that too, because as you're working through things and as you're working through projects with your consultants, more just so you know who to reach out to. And if there's any question about what's expected, you know who to reach out to. And so one thing I wanted to dump in here for the PM folks and everybody else is this work request form that we sort of put together, or it was together, it was floating around in various states of completion, and we combined our service lines into one. So for you internal folks who are managing projects, you've probably already seen this, but we use this to basically track projects within the unit. The unit has traditionally worked on request, and so since we work on request, we have to receive request, and receiving request in a standard way helps us to process that request and keep things moving. So that's what we tried to do here, is just give us all the information we need. And then these emails, which didn't come through very well but are also at the end, are the Geo pre-let emails that some of you may have seen. And they have the divisions actually in here, so you don't really got to think about it. You just got to know where your project is. You hit that email, it'll hit all the right people in those org charts shown back in there, and you know that you're getting it to the right people in the unit. We'll disseminate it down, get somebody working on your request. This can also be used, I mean, this doesn't have to be used for projects. So like if a project is not running through our contract, you can use this to say, hey, I got this scope and an estimate, and you review this one. Send that in. We got another, there's an other one there. Type it in the box. What I need you to do is I need you to be involved. So that's all we're really looking for here. And so the rest of the presentation, this is how my mind works. It's not a straight path to the end of this thing. We're going to meander through some geotech topics here. And so I'm not going to read it to you because you're about to get into it, but that's where we're going. So first, I'll start with geotech investigations because the PDN said this, and I don't know that it makes sense until we get bit by it. But one thing is the types of projects that we're working on. It's a completely different investigation than going out on geolocation and going out across fields versus when you're trying to investigate something right up to you. And so one thing I wanted to point out was that we got this equipment that can easily tear stuff up. We come in like right behind the location survey usually. We're some of the first people, the property owners and the public see working projects. You show up with 25,000-pound rig that looks like a bulldozer, start running over stuff, you get a lot of it. So I just kind of wanted to point out some of the complexities of doing some of these investigations and what's involved, and just that it has become much more complicated than it used to be to just go to drill a hole. Right? This doesn't come through very well, but there's a lot of widening projects now. Guess where all the utilities are? Where we're widening. How are you going to put a hole where all the utilities are? And so, and on top of that, when you're looking at subgrade, a hole 50 feet, 100 feet off the road probably isn't going to be indicative of what you're going to be putting pavement on anyway. And so, in addition to the utilities and the weather, which is running up until this week too, you know, there's other complications out there. So, like I said, we're some of the first people to make contact with property owners. Come hear me all right if I'm hot over here? I don't want we're some of the first people that property owners see, and although we are covered by a general statute to go in and take samples and do what we need to do, I know you don't catch more flies with honey, but catch more flies with honey. That's a little bit. But anyways, so we generally try to be amicable, and we prepared, since I've been over here, we've also prepared a template letter for property owner notification that sort of standardizes that language for our consultants. Access coordination, this could be, you know, a picture of the railroad up there. Everybody loves working around the railroad, right? And I sit in meetings with contractors and stuff, you know, they're asking DOT, like, hey, can you get me into the railroad any quicker? No, it holds all of us up too. Like everything that gets pushed down the road, that's just how they work. Further to the complicating matters is like, this is an excessive bench here. Like, we probably wouldn't do that. We want to stay away from that. But I just put it in here to kind of talk about, as you're having to cut benches in, if you do now, so thinking further west, the level of coordination there has increased drastically to sometimes being required to do erosion control plans, getting contractors lined up and involved to come out and do your bench, and then come back out and abandon your bench. I mean, it just turns into a whole thing now. That's why I put a picture of the mulcher up here, because a lot of people have gone to the mulching. You don't break the root mat. You can kind of drive right in. So that's the preferred method. And then traffic control has become a whole nother animal too, because I used to never be asked for traffic control plans. You just go shut the road down, and then not anymore. So, all right. So now we're really getting into the PDN revisions, which I worked on this in my old position with John and a few others, and sort of drug it into this position and wrapped it up because I was already into it and I'm learning how to delegate better. But anyways, the 1GT1 is more of like a planning phase for us, and I'm just asking at this point that we get a request just to know that a project is starting to move forward. I've added, this is nothing new, this was there before, both Geo-Environmental and the Geotech were there. Sorry to any environmental folks, but this isn't a Geo-Environmental presentation. I love them, but not what we're talking about today. But I did add geopavement to this because I've kind of seen a need to coordinate subgrade stabilization, what's been done, what works for certain projects in certain areas. We need to start having that communication earlier about getting some of this stabilization, be it chemical or aggregate subgrade, into plans and estimates earlier. And then one big change you'll notice is that I took all of those old boxes that basically said start here and then follow up with us here and then finish it up, and I stuck them into one. So the geopavement and the roadway are now under one activity, and they're like subtask under that activity. And that's, for those that have been working with the unit, we've been letting POs that way, we've been letting projects that way, trying to keep those investigations together because similar equipment, use drill rigs for both of them most of the time, and similar coordination, traffic control, utilities, all those things. So just not to duplicate efforts and to sort of streamline the investigation, get things done quicker, and also so that engineer is kind of looking at both aspects of that too, because you want to look at your mass grading and everything, all your earthwork coming up to subgrade, but then you also want to be paying attention to what you're doing with that subgrade when you get it there. The other thing that I put in here was, you got your Bentley project-wise, I would encourage some of the private teams, as you're working on this stuff, to think about how we can not duplicate work, because the traditional workflow for us was we sketch it out, we put it on the 25% plans at the time or whatever, and then we turn it over, and the roadway person has to take it and do it all over again. And, ain't nobody got time for that. I mean, that's all I got to say about that. So then I threw the structure stuff in here too. So, two slides. These were the actual deliverables. So something else that I did was I spelled out some of our special details and some of the other deliverables that weren't apparent in there. Like, we mentioned nothing about provisions previously, I don't think, and those can be quite important when it gets to our friends down there in contract. So nothing much else to say. I think y'all can read the slides. I can't. So, and then I just wanted to mention the structures investigations, because Sherry pointed out as we were kind of talking through this that one thing that comes out of the structures recommendations that the roadway folks need is the approach fields. And so I stuck that on there. We have simplified those last year into two types now. So type 1 is just spill through. Type 2 is basically your wall. We only recommend 1 and 2, and then if it's an integral abutment, the contractor picks the A alternates themselves. Temp shoring could be in here too, which is roadway people. And then if your retaining walls, if you didn't know the location of your retaining walls, which this doesn't really happen with freestanding walls, when we're working with roadway, like freestanding walls, usually y'all know where those are going pretty early on. And so we can pick those up pretty early. All we really need is an envelope, an idea of height, location. So I added this one in an effort to fix some of the PS&E package problems, and I didn't know what to call it. So you got verified geotech deliverables, really creative, but I think it gets the point across. Again, internal workflow. Geotech was not involved. We turn our recs in, we move on to the next project, we keep going. So right now I have this as DOT people, but the intent there is just that the DOT people reach out to the engineer and just make sure they understand what's needed so that they can get their project to let. We've identified we need to start sending that notification internally earlier and reaching out, but this was an attempt to sort of get that from the project team side as well. But just to make sure that provisions are in order, all the geotechnical details made it into the plan set like they're supposed to, that it's the right version of the geotechnical detail, those sorts of things happen. So along that line, where would you find it? Well, it could be anywhere right now because we don't have any guidance on that, but I'm going to fix that for you. It's sitting in my inbox. We've reviewed it. I mean, these were just some examples, and I wasn't really trying to pick on anybody with the TIPs or anything, but none of this shows up as good up here as I hoped it would. But this says final recs. Some of these key recommendations are indicated, but then you have other projects with all these Geotech deliverables. It could be our reports. It could be sheets y'all need for your plan sets. It could be the 3G ones. They're all just kind of dumped in there, and then none of them are marked final. None of them are marked key GT, so you can't find it, right? So we worked on that by using the road method. We ripped off and duplicated what location and surveys did and put a little geotech twist on it. And I think it turned out really well. And that should be coming out pretty soon. So that will help clarify some of this. But the way it's all set up, I mean, we have topics for roadway, pavement design, walls. I think we just need to be using it better, and us saying where it needs to be will help everybody find it. And then this isn't a digital delivery presentation or anything. I just put this in here because we just posted some training August, I believe the beginning of August, it actually was official. We under the ORD section of our website, we've posted videos. We tried to put together a quick memo just about where we're at, what's expected for projects, roadway, structure, that sort of thing. I think that got us a little bit of stability. Like, we're at a spot where we can produce a deliverable. It looks a lot like the deliverable we used to. Problem is, some of the workarounds are kind of labor intensive, and where I've left this, and I'll say it, I didn't write this down, but you really need to talk about what's needed for a project, right? Like, how much effort really needs to go into a model. If nobody's going to look at it, don't spend 200 hours doing it. Like, if you're going right beside a road and all your borings are at grade, you just look across the top of those borings, and you really need this. So that's all I'm kind of asking as we start getting some of these projects in, is just think about what the project is. Think about what's needed. Talk to the designer, the Geotech, and see what they need, because we've gone and done some of this before, and the Geotech never looks at it. He just takes the boring logs and starts designing shafts, right? I mean, this is on the shaft location. Design right off of that. And then as far as the digital delivery thing goes, so like I said, we have a config for the Geotech folks. We have a config pack from Open Ground that Bentley made for us. We can produce the boring logs. For whatever reason, they can't sort out that fence diagram thing, like it won't make the fence. And that's got some people really tore up. But we've got that far with them, and then, I should have put a picture in of their disclaimer. I need a disclaimer like the Bentley disclaimer, but Bentley had their conference, and it was basically like, we're going to show you all this stuff, but don't make any decisions based on what we're going to show you, because we may never deliver this. And that's not what anybody wants to hear, right? So we figure we've got about 2 years, because they're sunsetting Ghent. We're actively trying to figure out what product we're going to use, or products, and how we can present a deliverable that's useful by others. Something that feeds into a 3D model that somebody else can use without us sitting there telling you yes, no, yes, no. So that's where that's at. In digital delivery presentation, we'll move on into walls. So retaining walls, roadway design manual, chapter 5.5. So I told some people in here before, it's been a few years since I read the roadway design manual, back when I was more heavily involved in design. As I started putting this presentation together, and I started working with Sherry on some training, I've had the opportunity to sort of do a deep dive back into that, and it's an awesome manual, I will say. It covers a lot of this stuff. I was kind of putting this presentation together, and then I saw what was in there, and I was like, well, it's already said right here, so I won't really like quote it or read from it here. I kind of want to expand on it a little bit. But I think everybody generally knows what walls are. Like I said earlier, these wall locations, if we can figure them out, specifically freestanding walls, like what we would call roadway walls or whatever, if we kind of know where those are, it'd be helpful to get that out earlier so we can start talking about types of walls, because that would impact investigation. And one other thing I want to put on here, that last part down there, envelope zero out. We get a lot of walls that are just like blocked at the end, and that's not how dirt works. Soil, you get paid for it, it's soil. But, you know, it kind of spills around. You want it to kind of pinch out, right? So just something to think about. As the Geotech, I had to kind of go back and figure out what slope was going to work there and what that would look like on walls and modify them on the back end. So page 559 of the Roadway Design Manual basically says, look at the alternatives for walls. This is a project up in Polk County. That's an MSE wall at the bottom, and that's a soil mill wall at the top. So like this slide says, not considering right-of-way costs, that soil bank is always going to be your cheapest option. And then reinforced soil slope, you go steeper, you can go up to 1 to 1, half to 1 sometimes. And then retaining wall pretty much near vertical, so no right-of-way. But just things to consider that as you, not only from a construction standpoint, but as you start steepening things up, from an investigation and design standpoint, things start to get. So some depending on your project, some bridge projects, you just need to be sure that you're investigating what's needed, proposing what's needed relative to the job. I think I'll leave that. And then, so this last part I thought was pretty interesting, because that's kind of what the rest of the slides are going to show. But you know, you always see it on the cross section. You see it in plan. It's just the thick line right there. It's 1 foot thick, right? Like that's it. So what I wanted to do was basically just fly through these slides. These are a few different types of walls. This sort of mirrors the Roadway Design Manual presentation of the wall types. But on the field walls, these are the small blocks. You can barely see this at the bottom, but it's like an 8-inch face. I think it's 16 or 18 inches one. 18. And you just stack them up. So this is basically the same thing as an MSE wall or whatever, just without the reinforcement. This is a standard, and so this is kind of an off-the-shelf, works up to 5 feet. But again, if you start putting this in and you have to protect it with a guardrail, you end up with needing like 5.5, 6 feet there. So can't just butt things right up against it. This is another gravity wall. These are bigger blocks, so these are precast gravity. We also have, that's our drawing. We don't have a standard for this because basically taller the wall gets, the bigger the blocks you need, right? And so the bigger the blocks you need, the bigger the footprint gets. And so that's a 4-inch pipe. I think I estimated this one. I didn't do this one, but these sometimes are like 3 and 4 foot wide. And so you got to open up a 3-4 foot wide hole, and then you got to go back up from that to make room for all the drainage behind it. So again, not a foot thick. And then cast in place. This is our standard cast in place wall. Up at the top is the table for the footing width compared to the wall height. And so you can see that those those widths get pretty extensive as you start getting up around 10 feet or whatever. Again, more than a foot. Kind of just put this in here. I meant to say it on the last one, but the precast gravity options are becoming more prevalent these days, I've noticed. And this is just an example of one of those. Basically, all your weight on the heel keeps the wall stable. So MSE, I think everybody's seen a lot of these. I drove around the map on North Carolina, and I tried to find one that was not near a bridge. And then after like a few minutes of trying, I was like, okay, just don't show the bridge. So that's actually an abutment wall, but just pretend, because I didn't show the piles on here. But we have details for the abutment walls. We also have details when they're not, when they're freestanding. This is a panel version. I think the next one is, so this is the panel version. There's also an SRW unit version, which were the smaller blocks that we showed. MSE is pretty extensive, so I don't really know we need to spend a whole lot of time on that. Reinforcement can be steel. Yeah, y'all know all that. You can read that. Oh, one thing about that, though. As far as that reinforced zone length on that, a good rule of thumb on the low end, your best wall is going to be 0.78 plus a little bit of rim impact. But I would say that range is something like 0.7, 1.2, maybe. Just to think about, based on soil conditions. That's the other thing about walls is everyone's different and special. So this is just the SRW. These are smaller units. I stole this picture because it shows the grid, it shows the reinforcement, kind of shows you what's going on. We don't really use these on high volume, like we don't use them on interstate, don't use them near railroads. Those are the panel walls. Sheet piles, everybody's seen sheet piles, I think, but the biggest thing just to talk about sheet piles is embedment. So they go in the ground. Rule of thumb for that is like 2 feet in for 1 foot out, or 2 foot in for 1 foot exposed. They come in a bunch of different shapes. You can go to heavier shapes, but really you're good cantilevered up to about 10 or 12 feet maybe. And that may be pushing it in some places. Just depends on what's down there, and that's why we do Geotech. I think that's all there. And then soldier pile. I personally love soldier pile. They are a good top-down option for construction, or they can be fill walls. I know this says cut. You can fill behind one too. It works the same way. But just threw some details in here. I mean, for those of you that don't know, soldier pile is very similar to the sheet pile, where you have to embed an element in the ground, but instead of it being continuous, you've got discrete foundations, and then you're basically putting panels or lagging in between there, holding the soil back. So again, you got to be careful underneath it, because those drilling drops, if you're not driving the piles, those drilling drops will get up 33 foot, they can get pretty big. And it's basically, for those of you that know where the drill pier is, you kind of do the same thing. You drill a hole, it's open, you drop the pile in, you fill it with concrete. Soil nail, this is another top down. We've got some out on Wake Forest Road that are in some highly micaceous, silty soils that have performed all right. As you get more into soil, these nails tend to get longer or more numerous. But the important thing to kind of know about soil nails, so I wanted to show this because, again, this is top down. You basically come down, and these are each of the nails that they put in. And then this is the unfinished part. So they shot through, you got all this reinforcement, and then they shot through that. And then what they'll do is when you get done, they'll come back and you can do an architectural space. So that's one thing about them, is that you can make them prettier. And then this is just the detail for the soil nail. One thing I wanted to point out. So the soil nail, these are actually bars. So these are solid bars. There's not an option for the tendons on those, but in this picture here for the anchored wall, which is just the soldier pile that has an anchor on it, you can kind of see the tendons. So these are tendons. Both work the same. It's basically encapsulated in grout or whatever, and then you'll put a jack on it and you'll pull it to sort of pre-stress it and hold that wall back into the face, right? Let's see. So this one, not cantilever. So as soon when your soldier piles, so with an HP 12 or 14 section, you can usually get, again, up to about 12 feet cantilever, just depending on conditions. Then once you start getting over that, you'll start having to put these tiebacks in. And this one shows these anchors, but you can also do like a deadman, like if this, I know this says cut, but in a fill situation or whatever, or in a partial fill situation, you could do an anchor at the bottom and then you could do like a deadman or bury something at the top to resist that loading at the top. So I kind of flew through that part. I'm going to come back to that in a second, but I just threw this slide in. I went through the outward-facing bid averages, of course, to give me better information, but I just went through the stuff that everybody else could find and just kind of threw these up there for division let and central let for 2023 just to give an idea. I don't really want to harp on this. Like, don't go to your job and start using these numbers for your job. That's all I'll say. We can get you better information for the location you're at and the size of project that you have to try to weigh out what options you want to go with. So our deliverables for this, you get an inventory report, gets uploaded to let prep and final plans. I always did a W sheet package, but since I got over here, I found out that you don't have to for some of the standard small walls. But basically, the package would be your plan, where it's at, the envelope, how tall it is, what it looks like, and then your sections and any notes for the contractor. So a lot of these walls, other than the cast in place and the standard walls, a lot of these walls are actually designed by others post-let. So the internal components and the full wall design would be done post-let. So we're just basically making sure that a wall will work there. And again, the envelopes facing from the front. I don't remember if I said that earlier, but that's the face of the wall. So your stationing could go the other way, right? This is just a quick slide. Those are the walls that are in the standard specs, and then the walls at the bottom require a special provision, and then there's a link to our page where these provisions are at to get you started. Geotech. Roadway people, tell your Geotech to go find those. I just threw sound barrier walls in here just to say that sound barrier walls are similar to retaining walls. You're retaining sound and wind. They still have to be investigated. Embedments on those are more like 1 to 1-ish. They are cantilever, but there's a lot of drilling and dropping going on with those too. So you're drilling 30 and 36-inch holes every 10 to 15 feet. So kind of hard to run utilities there too. Before I leave retaining walls, so one thing that I do want to say about retaining walls, sort of started with this, but like I said, you see this 1 foot wide element on a plan. Just start thinking about working with your team and putting those reinforced zones and those sorts of things into your plans, especially as we're moving more towards digital models and being better able to model this stuff, right? Like, because running utilities, it's not that you can't run utilities behind these walls. It's not that you can't put foundations behind these walls, but complicating it is not going to make it cheaper. So just something to think about. So now into the roadway reports. Not much to talk to y'all about on the inventories. This goes straight to final plans, goes with the contract for information. It goes to the contractor for information. Represents what we got into, and then it basically is our data report. And then the geologist and the engineer will use that report to put together the recommendations that we provide to you all. And so, again, Roadway Design Manual does a good job of describing these deliverables, so I don't really want to harp on that. Found this cool picture of a slope failure. Again, that was cool up until this week. Now I'm having nightmares about that. So, roadway recommendations. This was actually 540 in the Triassic Basin, and they laid it back, and they had sloughing failures pretty early on. So, again, just briefly running through our Recommendations. First section is your slopes and embankments. So basically we tell you right there how to prepare foundation soils to put embankments on them or to reinforce embankments. And then we tell you the slope configurations that you should be considering for your job. Just kind of gave you some rules of thumb. Triassic is an exception in the Piedmont just because the bedding planes dip to the southeast in such a way that even they're kind of at a 4-to-1 slope. So even when we cut them back, usually over 10 feet, we try to lay them back, but understanding that you may not always have the room, you may need to come up with some solution, maybe a wall at the bottom and a broken slope on the back, something like that. But Triassic can get kind of nasty. In the coastal plain, we usually stick to 3-to-1. Cleaner material, just doesn't stick together and stand up as well. Although I've seen a lot of 2-to-1s down there that have done just fine, but that's what we do. And then 2-to-1s as you move to the west of 95 into the Piedmont. Embankment stability, I kind of touched on. Yeah, so that's what it's called. Not confusing at all. It's all undercut. We just call it different undercuts. And then y'all have to just go find all of it. So I'm up to feedback on that too, however we can fix that. But so embankment stability undercut would be undercut under embankment section. So undercutting muck, whatever. Geotech style for soil stabilization could be used in the bottom of that undercut. And I'm just mentioning Geotech style for soil stabilization here because we're going to get back to that in a little bit. Slopes. So this is also, like I said, ground improvement. If we need to do something to support that embankment, that may be in here, maybe in an addendum. If we do any of that ground improvement, we probably need to provide you with a provision describing how to construct it and some details showing how to construct it. The stuff that's up here, rock embankment, so that's typical for embankments in water. But we got to kind of tell you how to choke that off and put your road on top of it. This was a wick drain job that I did in a past life with stage construction because we had to get the clay drained out and could only build it up about 2/3 of the way before we had to let it sit and then put the rest on. So subgrade stability, section 2. This is more for the near grade sections of the project. I put subsurface drainage in here because this is always, we get a lot of questions about this, and they changed the roadway standard details. So now they've got these details that are shown up here for where to put it in the medians. Subsurface drain is a more, what I'll say for those that aren't Geotech, subsurface drain is a more permanent drain. It's basically wrapped in a Geotech style stone. It's meant to function indefinitely, whereas the under drain and the blind drain are probably going to clog at some point, and they're really meant to drain for constructability. So if you've got shallow groundwater, you probably want to go more with the subsurface drain. Also boulevard ditches, but we just don't have the right of way. Again, going back to the projects we're working on, you can't cut a 6-foot ditch in everywhere anymore. So grade point undercut is just another type of undercut where proposed grade crosses existing grade. Undercut for subgrade stability. So this would be recommended in this section, and this is just your straight up undercut. And we'll touch on the undercuts later, but this is just straight up undercut. As far as borrow, this table that's in the roadway design manual is the same table we use, but don't tell anybody. We'll give you strength swell. This also talks about which borrow criteria to use, statewide or coastal plain. And then any of that geotextile from the previous sections, you'll have to cover it with select granular, and so that would be down here as well. And then the miscellaneous is where we get into the unclassifieds and, the reduction of unclassified quantities. So loss due to clearing and grubbing, your unsuitable waste, your acceptable but not in the top 3 feet of embankment, and then degradable rock, because all degradable rock and acceptable sort of have special handling. This is also where we'll call out the water wells that are in the project that'll need to be abandoned, and then ponds. That's in there because ponds in the project, you need to figure out how to get rid of them, and then ponds along the project, it's just like crack monitoring. You kind of want to go out, check the sediment in the pond, and then get a baseline so if you have any future problems during construction, you can say, well, this is what it was before we started, and then compare back. So moving along, all of the roadway recommendations text report should be accompanied by a summary of quantities. I'm pretty sure most of you have seen this. The one thing I wanted to point out is because some of these pay item numbers have changed a few times over the past few years, specifically related to aggregate subgrade, we added a version, and then I mentioned to the Geotech folks, it was never clear to me and it hadn't been said, but if you're trying to figure out how to outline your report and write your report, if you go in and you pick the quantity or the section that you want, it'll tell you in there all of the pay items that kind of go with that. So like aggregate subgrade is supposed to go all under section 2, but could be everywhere. And we'll touch on that at the end. So then the only other thing I really wanted to point out with the roadway recs was the 3G1 sheet. And so I've been talking to Roadway about this a little bit. This is still provided in an Excel form from us. And the way the roadway design manual reads is that the poor roadway designer has to read our minds, go find all these, and then combine them. If you're on a team for a division project or something, I leave it up to the roadway and the Geotech to figure out how that gets delivered. I mean, to me, it's just a simple question of, is this all of it, or do I need to go find more? But, and then this is just our 3G1. I think you've all seen this before, so not really much to talk about here. Oh, other than that, has a versioning date on it too, which comes in handy with aggregate subgrade. The Geotech standard details, already touched on this. There's a few things in there that have standards from us, and then a few others down at the bottom I just mentioned just off the top of my head. So we do a lot of surcharging, wait periods with or without wick drains, and so a lot of what you'll see for those would just be details like this where we're telling you build the embankment to here, let it sit this long, that kind of thing. Reinforced soil slopes. So these are geocells getting filled in. Kind of just wanted to talk about reinforced soil slopes because these could be presented in those recommendations up under the slope section. Could also be an addendum later if it wasn't known that something needed to be steepened up. This is not the same as a reinforced embankment over soft soil. That is completely different. Will require a detail and a provision because the designer will have to tell you what geotextile to put in it or what strength, how much of it, that kind of thing. We've got standards for high and low groundwater for a max height up to 36 feet. And they're reinforced with GeoGrid, not this GeoGrid in particular, but this was a cool picture of GeoGrid. And so for non-standard, the engineer, I basically put this up here. Our standard details gave me a pretty good start as a designer. And then I just kind of modified those if we needed to make links longer or whatever and adjusted the provision accordingly. And then down at the bottom, again, I just put rough cost, but again, just watch out because that's square yards of slope face, so it's not like a direct comparison back to the wall cost. And then this is just our standard, not really much to talk about here. The biggest difference between low and high groundwater is how much reinforcement you need. That's all these boxes show. And then this is along 485, which those of you in the Charlotte area, I'm sure y'all have seen 485 being worked on. But Rodney Street, so you can kind of see they had to steepen that slope and make room for the I-485 shoulder to be pushed over. So they used a reinforced soil slope, and it was cool because we were looking at FDR and providing recs on FDR and Rodney Road, and then we found out that on Google Maps you could see this getting built. And so I was like, well, I know where to go to. So pretty much what's going on is that was this slope before. I think it's like a 2-to-1. And this shows, you can see the geogrid sticking out up there. And then they're working their way down with the geocells. So they got this geotextile that goes behind it, then they lay the geocells out. This has to be done by hand. That's one reason that we don't use them a lot for subgrade. I don't know that we have, but you have to pull them out and kind of do it all by hand. So it's kind of labor intensive to get that put in. But the good thing is you fill them back in, and then it gets vegetated, and it's pretty stable. So unclassified quantity reductions. Anything under a foot would get covered here. If it's more than a foot, it gets called out on the inventory and undercut. I put in the typical recommendations for thickness. And then the only other thing on this really is referring back to the common borrow spec. That's what I used as a consultant as sort of guidance for what stays and goes and can't be where. And then this is just a quick picture of sort of how those quantities get incorporated into the earthwork balance and where. So then our other report, why we do two reports. Because one looks more at the mass grading while the other, like I said, sort of looks at supporting the pavement section. And we're also going in and doing this kind of thing where you've got like this drainage layer, you've got this concrete pavement with all this asphalt around it, you have this little bitty drainage layer, so the only way this is going to drain is that way, right? And that's a lot of what we look at is what pavement sections can you put up beside this, or what do you have to do with this to make sure that you're not causing problems, cutting off drainage, then you'll have water running up through your pavement, that kind of thing. The other thing it looks at, so this is also, we'll get into this, this is also where we provide the recommendations for the chemical or aggregate subgrade stabilization. We've pushed this up earlier in the PDN progressively over the years. And the intent there is that we'll go out and start communication with the roadway and the project manager, basically the design team, just kind of let you know what's coming from that perspective, because those weren't getting added into estimates until after right-of-way. And so we were seeing cost spike because now all of a sudden we're stabilizing the whole alignment and nobody knew about that. So that was a problem. And that's one way that I can think of to fix it. And then with this one, you'll get the quantity summary, just like the other written report. But these are the two tables on here that you'll usually see associated with the pavement and subgrade recs. And then I kind of put a separate section in here, so both reports could have undercut in them, shallow or standard, or undercut excavation is the pay item. But it'll be shown in the graphic report that may accompany the recommendations like this, and we're just trying to get that into the plans. I think, I don't have it on there, but on one of these slides, it basically says that it's the roadway designer's responsibility to show it and label it. And then, so undercut, shallow undercut, where you show it. That one shows up in typical sections. This is a holdover from when we had only one type of aggregate subgrade and it was still called shallow undercut. But that's why we've created details, which I'll show in a minute. But it doesn't show up on the profile. And then standard, so between the undercut, something else that came up, something that was brought up earlier was if there's a discrepancy. And it's not written down anywhere what to do with the discrepancy. So who's right? And the roadway design manual basically says that the roadway designer's quantities supersede. All I'll say to that is that if you're a roadway designer and your quantities don't come close to what Geotech did, that's a relative term, I know. But if there's a discrepancy, you may want to talk it out because something may have been missed. We've had projects where stuff was missed. There was a misunderstanding, miscommunication. Cost us like $12 million, so we kind of want to avoid that. But again, theme of the workshop, communicate. So then, now we're into aggregate subgrade, which has been a major point of confusion lately. So one thing I will say, we've got two types now. Type 1, you'll mostly see in the roadway report because it's used to repair specific areas, whereas Type 2 is more used under larger sections of an alignment to stabilize. It also contributes to the pavement section structurally, so they will include the Type 2 in the structural design of the pavement. It's supposed to be placed on a proof-rolled subsoil, so you got to do that because it also has a higher compaction requirement, and it's just hard to get that higher compaction out of something that's built on a waterbed. And so this slide right here is like worth the whole 55 minutes you've been listening, because I am finishing up a memo that basically is to the effect of what I'm trying to convey here, and that is that there's been a pay item change associated with aggregate subgrade. And that has to do with the Geotech style. And unfortunately, the easy way to know if you've got a problem is if you've got aggregate subgrade recommended and you don't see Geotech style for subgrade stabilization, you got a problem. And that's kind of what the memo is going to say. Sherry told me I need to do like a table, a flow chart. I'm still working through that. But what we're going to propose is that if it's a contingency only, we'd just like the roadway designer to change that quantity associated with the aggregate subgrade and move on. That's easier said than done because, again, we still use Geotech style for soil stabilization, and some of those designers may have combined those quantities, and so it may not be obvious that this 150 yards is for aggregate subgrade and the rest of this is for embankment stability or whatever. So again, it just goes back to communication. I hope to get that memo out pretty soon. It's close, but that's kind of where I'll leave that for now. I mean, I don't want to beat aggregate subgrade to death. So it does go into the typicals. We've got these details. We've got the inset details. That's the location for the cell library. They're in the English typical library. We've got them for Geotech style for subgrade stabilization by itself, which is same thing, it just doesn't have aggregate on it. We've started using a lot more aggregate subgrade. And then also what I wanted to point out, like this one was done well because you've got the detail, the section detail for how to build it, where to put it, where it's at. But you've also got the detail for people that don't know anything about the textiles as far as which way to put it. You know, somebody's like, hey, do we need that detail? Yeah, it doesn't show up well, but that's basically telling you which way to lay it down. One big change with aggregate subgrade was we were putting it transverse previously. That caused us some problems. So it's kind of shingled all the way down the alignment, whereas now it's parallel. Makes it a lot quicker to build, too. We're getting real close, but the last thing I kind of wanted to mention, this came up recently on a project, and this kind of ties it all back together, too, because the roadway designer, once again, is the one who's responsible for figuring this out. And I just wanted to point out that asphalt removal and breaking are typically cheaper than concrete removal and breaking. And if you've got asphalt over concrete, which is what happened, then it's supposed to be paid at the concrete rate. But they did, on this particular project that I'm thinking of, they did holes through the pavement. They had an inventory report that showed asphalt over concrete, but they only had an asphalt breaking quantity or pay item in there. And so it resulted in a supplemental after the fact because there was concrete that had to be broken up. So anytime we're encasing or building an embankment around and over, This says, I think, more than a foot. But anytime we're building an embankment over old pavements, it's important to break those pavements up. We just don't, again, going back to drainage and everything, we just don't want water hitting that and sitting in there. And, you know, if you break it up, it all kind of moves with the embankment. Water can move through it. And then I'm just going to stop there because we got like 15 minutes and y'all can, I figured there'd be some questions. Those were the slides. I can go back to slides. We can talk about something that wasn't in the slides. Y'all can leave. Up to y'all. So this presentation started in the direction of chemical stabilization. And then I got comments about how I need to talk about some other stuff. And now I don't know if I really talked about anything, but I'll leave that up to y'all to decide. What in particular? I mean, one thing we pointed out, one thing I was working with Terry on, there is a rate in the table. The roadway design, how to put together the schedule, and we're going to take that rate out. Those rates should be provided back for that. In general, we use Geotech group additionally and out. Subgrade, subgrade. Home design building jobs. Anything in particular about it? Where? As a when do you, I think, if it's 6 feet or wide. There's other, so what I will say is that our unit offers more geared towards inspectors, but it's very informative for designers. From standpoint, some of these chemical reactions, you don't really want to see. So it's not as simple as you always do it here, you always do it there. We do combinations. Upgrade. Both chemical and coastal plants. We have on NC12, but that was just to keep NC12. So, and just the big pieces of NC12 that are all sitting together. But it's more as we move into designing it. As a designer, I would say reach out to the engagement group because we have to do I don't have a good answer. Most things keep on. Most things higher volume. Really just depends on which ADD. Right? Start with coming down. Right? What I will say about it contributes. The way we build roads, here's we have some grade one time. We need to make sure that we do it right. A lot of what I see is Yeah, but that's because there was like two people doing all this. But the intent there would be to show shallow. Because that's the only way to contract. I think that's the bigger thing. I would like this to be the way it works now with our graphic. Have to just stay on our side. That's not really helping the contract. We'll show it in the contract. Yeah, it does. It says in the roadway design thing, shaded and not double hatched. I've seen shallow just double hatched. Even if it was
I was going to ask, so why doesn't the 3D1 table include standard undercut? Just the shallow.
I think also
That's how it gets conveyed.
instead you'll notice the subgrading. Shallow.
I mean, I would say, like, arguably, like, undercut for maintenance is probably one of the most important aspects of subgrade repair rather than subgrade or shallow undercut or standard undercut. Construction contingencies, unknowns, but whereas maintenance is really very clear station ranges.
Great job.
All right, thank you. If you want PDHs, there's a QR code pinned on the wall, and I will display one on the screen behind me.
Do I get one?
That is that is up to you and your own.
It took way longer than an hour to prepare.
So what?
That is up to you.
No, I think they
And just to remind you, the break is only a 15-minute break. It's a short one, trying to give you back some of your day. So